Welcome to the Glassworking shop. Well, the pieces came out pretty good. It's still too early to tell if the pattern is going to be really good or just barely good, or if something will go wrong and it's going to suck, but preliminary indications are that it's at least in the ballpark. I might, as I look at the final pattern and see if the circle radius comes out to be correct, and if the pattern actually looks like circles, I may need to adjust the radius on the squeezing die, or possibly adjust my procedure. But anyway, I took the pull and cut it up into 4 pieces. I'm still somewhat uncertain about what's the correct approach to this project, but I think I've decided for this particular experiment that I'm gonna cut the thing up into 4 pieces, punty up, pull it down into fairly small segments, and then cut the segments up and chip stack them together and see how it works. The other possibility would be to cut it up into segments, resize the segments, stick them together into a subassembly, pull down the subassembly, cut it into chips, and chip stack it. I'm not sure. I think the evidence of the subassembly would be so strong that it would mess up the pattern. So there's really not a lot of interesting stuff to see in the resizing and pulling operation. So this may either be a short video, or I may combine it with the chip stack. I don't know. But anyway, here goes. Also, one other comment, my new recording system seems to have some strange quirks, but overall it appears to be working well. I'm still, like everything in this process, I'm still refining and perfecting and trying to figure out what the right way to do everything is. So the R&D probably will never stop until I stop doing it. But so far, recording seems to be working. The videos seem to be coming out pretty good. And anyway, let's get to work. So I'm going to start off here making some punties. I'm gonna make sure I got my ventilation on. That's one thing that, as I mentioned in the previous video, something I need to just work on getting better at is being prepared. Having punties made, having tubes flared, just basically having things ready so when I need them, they're available. Boy, this old glass rod is an ugly, dirty old rod. So I'm going to be using the smallest of the triangle squeezing dies, the 5/8 squeezing dies, to make these triangular punties. And do a pretty good job. The triangular pieces that I'm going to be attaching to are somewhere in the neighborhood of 3/4, but I'm thinking that a 5/8 might be a good size for a punty, because they kind of tend to get a little bigger when they're squeezed into position. I'm just cleaning up the end. once again, like so many things about the squeezer, you wouldn't buy a squeezer just to make triangle punties. But if you already had a squeezer in your shop and you wanted to make triangle punties, it's a great tool. And that really is the interesting question about the commercial future of the squeezer. And I'm trying to talk and do two things at one time. Let me just let this guy hang out in the far flame a little bit. That raises an interesting question about the commercial future of the squeezer. Is anybody going to buy any of them? It is, unfortunately, there's a lot of parts in a squeezer and even more parts in a full set of squeezing dies, and a squeezer and a full set of dies is pretty expensive, and it takes me a long time to make them. It's a lot of work. And so the question arises, is anybody going to be interested in these things? I find it very useful in my shop, and I'm just starting to explore all of the things that it can possibly do, and I'm very interested in working with more experienced glassworkers to see what kind of ideas can be thought up using the squeezer. But it's going to be an interesting question, since I know that glass is art in general is a difficult field to make a living in, and glass is one of the most difficult forms of art. And I know glassworkers, a lot of them don't have a lot of money, and so it's going to be interesting to see what the commercial future of the squeezer is. But just as a useful tool in my shop, I love it. I'm reusing a bunch of old punties here. And I'm probably not going to show any more punty making because that's not very interesting. Actually, there's very little interesting. The only reason I'm making this video is just out of some sort of a sense of completeness, just to show every step, but an awful lot of what I'm going to be doing today isn't that interesting. So I've got my triangle sections. The previously made triangle sections have been preheating in the kiln, and now I'm preheating my tongs so that I don't shock them too bad when I take them out. Maybe Mr. Temperature Glove might be my friend trying to get a triangular piece out of the kiln. When you start dealing with odd shapes, they get more and more difficult to grab. So once again, procedure here is to heat the end of the punty pretty aggressively and just barely heat the end of the Marini piece. Just kind of get it hot enough to stick so I don't distort too much of the pattern. So that And yeah, might as well take this over to the camera and show you. I don't know if that thing comes out in focus, but the pattern actually is looking kind of realistic, roughly and kind of approximately realistic. So I'm gonna kind of gently out here in the outer flame get a little heat into this piece. I'm going to use an annealing flame. Even though the pulled piece was fully annealed with a proper annealing cycle, still a good idea to be careful. I think at this stage in my learning process, it's probably better to be over careful than it is to be too aggressive. So that guy is looking pretty good, I think. Get my punty ripping hot. Turn down the flame a little bit. And I'm going to be doing the pull and the resizing by hand, seeing how good I can do. Little bit by little bit, I'm practicing and improving my handwork skill in pulling, making sure to, well, my goal is to have uniform heat in the piece being pulled. But the way to achieve uniform heat is often to put a little more heat on the ends and kind of let the center take care of itself. Another thing, I'm pulling a relatively small piece here, and it's a very kind of a non-linear process. A larger piece takes a lot longer than you would expect to heat up for pulling, and a smaller piece heats up really quick. And of course, just for practice pulling, a triangle is really hard to pull, so it's great practice just for trying to maintain hand coordination and get heat control. The triangle will definitely teach you. And I am having trouble trying to get these pieces as uniform as I can. what I'm finding a lot of the key to success here is to apply some heat, let it rest for a moment, and then pull very, very gently. Almost no pull at all. Almost as gentle as I can possibly pull. Kind of like what they say about learning to fly a helicopter. You don't move the controls, you think about moving the controls, and sometimes for a new helicopter student who doesn't yet have the skill, that's actually enough input, because new pilots tend to over-control. And no, I'm not a helicopter pilot, but I did take flying lessons. I did take one lesson flying a helicopter, and gives me great respect for the pilots that I've seen that are good. I'm not sure how small I want to make these, but what I do know is that it takes a lot of skill to do a uniform smaller pull. That as the pull gets smaller, it becomes much more difficult to control, easier to make mistakes. Harder to keep uniform, and well, that one may be as good as it gets. Hopefully maybe the next one will be a bit better. And then of course this brings up a squeezer question. Why am I not, okay, let me just show how this one came out. Not horrible, but not that great either. Brings up a squeezer question. Well, could I conceivably cut these up, reheat them, and resize them perfectly in the squeezer? And I'm not sure. It may or may not be possible. My preliminary experiments tell me that once the glass gets really, really small, it doesn't hold much heat. And by the time I just move just a couple of feet from the torch to the squeezer, it's already too cold to squeeze. So I've actually experimented with the hand torch right next to the squeezer, torching and sticking as fast as I can, and it's a difficult coordination to master, difficult thing to do, and I'm not ready to give up yet, but there's reason to believe that that kind of very small size triangles, like 1/2 inch and below, squeezing them in the squeezer may not be a reasonable or productive kind of attempt. Squeezing a 1x1 square results in a perfect resize that's just plain beautiful, but I'm not completely sure yet if squeezing a 1/2x1/2 is possible, or even if there's a good reason to do it. So probably gonna stop the recording now, and if this is the end, thank you for watching. If I decide to continue tomorrow with the chip stack, well, then this is only the end of part 1.